Burnham's failure would provide much schadenfreude, but it's also crucial to stop him from winning. Let's go through the reasons. Firstly, he is in favour of rejoining the EU and was pushing for a second referendum before we left. Only in September 2025 he said, "Long term, I'm going to be honest, I'm going to say it, I want to rejoin it. I hope in my lifetime I will see this country rejoin the European Union." Burnham also made his famous remark, also in September 2025, about the bond markets. "We've got to get beyond this thing of being in hock to the bond markets." At the time, he said he would nevertheless abide by Rachel Reeves' fiscal rules to limit public spending. Days before the local election, Burnham suggested to Bloomberg these rules could be deviated from in certain circumstances, citing German defence spending. His words were taken to suggest he would waive the fiscal rules in other areas than defence. The remarks, commentators believed, had a negative effect on the bond market the day after the by-election was triggered, and thus a Burnham premiership seemed likely. Burnham kept going, and on the 16th of May he implied to Channel 4 he would nationalise water and energy companies, which would of course incur much public spending. "We need a different path completely. Put more things back under stronger public control: energy, housing, water, transport." By the 18th of May, however, our Andy decided he needed to walk back on the bond markets remark and his fiscal rules position. Talking to ITV, he said, "I have never said you can just ignore the bond markets. I'm quite clear. I support the fiscal rules. There needs to be a plan to get the debt down." After this intervention, the bond markets were reassured somewhat, and they relaxed again. In a sense, Burnham is right that policy should not be overly determined by private investors. However, you cannot simply pretend that governments do not have to borrow from investors to fund their spending, or that this borrowing does not result in interest or gilt yields that have to be paid back, getting higher the more government spending and debt levels increase. You cannot rely on some notion of modern monetary theory, MMT, that the government can simply create and spend as much money as it likes, because the consequence would be a depreciation of the currency and hyperinflation of prices. If, like Burnham, you have a quasi-Corbynite program of mass public spending, you really must consider the bond market when making such decisions. Otherwise, you're no better than Zach Polanski. The country does not need any more economic chaos right now, and some tightening of spending needs to happen, especially in the welfare sector. The welfare question is of course tied to immigration, as the ballooning numbers of incomers are a clear drag on benefits. There were also concerns that Burnham would ditch Shabana Mahmood's planned reforms, as it were, to the immigration system. In November 2025, concerning these measures in general, Burnham said, "I do have a concern about leaving people without the ability to settle. That might limit the Home Office's ability to deal with the backlog, and it may leave people in a sense of limbo and unable to integrate." He also opposed a 1999 Labour-written law which forbids migrants to receive state benefits until they are granted residency. Yet another set of Burnham flip-flops were to come. Realising how big the issue was, especially in Makerfield, on 20th of May he had allies suggest he would back Mahmood's plans. Burnham confirmed this was the case 2 days later. "We'll have to work hard to get the balance right, but the broad thrust of what she's doing is right." He also said that immigration numbers needed to come down. On the 29th of May, he announced he was no longer opposed to the 1999 law. Will the real Andy Burnham please stand up? Another volte-face was made on the trans issue. In 2019, he wrote a joint letter with 4 other Labour mayors. It called on the then government to bring in self-ID, meaning a person could declare themselves another sex without a doctor signing off on it. In a speech in 2022, Burnham said, "Clearly there is a group of people who do feel that toilets should be a safe space only for women, and there should not be anyone biologically a male allowed in that space. I don't think that's a majority view. In fact, I think it's a minority view, and quite a small minority view, actually. The idea that people are falsely portraying their gender in a different way just because they want to abuse a woman's space or encroach on women's safety. Maybe it happens, but you are talking a tiny, tiny, tiny number of people. I am going to make it really plain. I support trans rights, and I want that to be known. He followed this up in 2025 by questioning the Supreme Court ruling on the issue. The ruling was that single-sex spaces were protected by equality legislation, and that biological sex was the basis for determining access to these spaces. Burnham observed, "I think it has become more confusing in the real world as a result. The interim guidance that was issued, I don't think that has taken us forward at all." Spool onto the campaign trail in 2026, and Burnham saw the light. "I think the time has come to take the Supreme Court ruling and the guidance and implement it, but do it in a way that protects those spaces, but does not marginalise already marginalised communities." The biggest danger presented by Burnham, though, is his policy of proportional representation, PR. Some on the right might approve of this. However, here's the sting in the tail. It is thought he also wants to establish a progressive coalition with other liberal left parties. If so, using PR, this would coordinate to keep the right out of politics for generations. Heritage figures such as Caroline Lucas and Jonathan Bartley were against their party running. The Greens are reportedly not committing significant resources to the campaign. And why would they? The Greens know tactically it makes no sense to spend time, money and energy opposing someone who agrees with 70% of their worldview and will give them something they want. PR and a route towards power, shared or otherwise. Indeed, this is supported by an open letter organised by the think tank Compass and aimed at the Greens. It is signed by 11 prominent Green supporters, including Bartley. Compass is proposing to create a so-called Council for the Progressive Majority, which will push to promote PR. It will consist of 2 prominent figures each from Labour, the Greens, Lib Dems, Plaid Cymru and the SNP. Burnham and Compass are connected because the founder, Neil Lawson, is a known supporter of Burnham's. Before the Simons resignation, Burnham was due to speak at one of their events, held on 30th of May, but he pulled out when he knew he'd be running in Makerfield. Also appearing would be Green and Lib Dem figures. This was publicised in early May, and Burnham's decision was met with criticism from other Labour figures. Burnham has long supported electoral reform. Partly, he claims, this is because until 2024, the Manchester mayoral elections were decided by a supplementary vote system. I don't think this keenness is born out of democratic principle, but out of perceived necessity, nationally speaking. Some within Labour, not all, see their dwindling vote share, even in Starmer's landslide, and feel their only chance of keeping power is through a system that does not require an outright majority. In the days before the Compass letter, written on May 24th, Burnham told BBC Radio, "I do think there needs to be reform to the electoral system to enable less point scoring, more problem solving. That's what I think we need." But following the Compass letter, Burnham was sure to get specific. He did this a week later on May the 31st. "I am committed to proportional representation. I think it would change the political culture." He said he will make this a manifesto pledge and will not hold a referendum on the matter. "I would prefer a manifesto commitment. When I came into politics, my dad said, never commit to a referendum on anything. It will follow an official consultation into exactly how the electoral system can be reformed, but one gets the impression PR is preordained in his mind. This gives credence to the idea Burnham might call an early general election. He may be in a hurry to fast-track this constitutional vandalism. Starmer is awful, but at least so far he's not proposing to upend the whole system. Crucially, Starmer is more beatable, as would be any of the other leadership contenders, Rayner, Miliband or Streeting, Mahmood the only possible exception. As a well-known and somehow popular figure who is slightly stronger than Starmer, Burnham has more of a chance to turn Labour's fortunes around when we need them to stay weak and on the ropes. I have no vote up there in Makerfield, but if I did, I would opt for reform. There is no question of that. Call me cautious, but I want Burnham thwarted, and here and now, Reform are the party to do it.